Welcome to Champion Stories. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And now, on to today's story. The clock had just struck 9:59 p.m. on September 30th, 2025, when the earth beneath the central Philippines began to tremble with a fury that would forever change countless lives. In his quiet home, Manny Pacquiao felt the familiar sensation of the ground shifting beneath his feet, but this time was different. This time, the tremor carried with it a violence that spoke of devastation, of lives hanging in the balance, of his beloved countrymen facing their darkest hour. As the 6.9 magnitude earthquake ravaged the coastal city of Bogo in Cebu province, Manny stood frozen in his living room, watching the chandeliers sway dangerously overhead. The tremor seemed to last an eternity, each second stretching like a lifetime, as he thought of the millions of Filipinos who called this region home. His heart raced not from fear for his own safety, but from the overwhelming dread of what this natural disaster might mean for his people. When the shaking finally subsided, an eerie silence fell over the archipelago. But this silence was deceptive, masking the chaos that was already unfolding across Cebu and the neighboring towns. Manny immediately reached for his phone, his fingers trembling as he tried to contact friends and colleagues in the affected areas. The first few calls went unanswered, the networks overwhelmed by the sudden surge of desperate voices trying to reach their loved ones. Within hours, the devastating reports began to filter through the media channels. Buildings that had stood for decades had crumbled into heaps of concrete and steel. The vibrant streets of Cebu, once filled with the laughter of children and the bustling energy of daily commerce, were now shrouded in darkness as power lines snapped and electricity grids failed. Deep fissures had torn through the roads like scars across the landscape, making rescue efforts treacherous and isolating entire communities from the outside world. Manny sat transfixed before his television screen, watching as emergency responders worked tirelessly through the night. The images were heartbreaking. Families huddled together in the streets, too afraid to return to their damaged homes, elderly residents being carried on makeshift stretchers, children crying for parents who might never answer their calls again. The official report spoke of at least 69 confirmed deaths and over 140 injured, but Manny knew these numbers would likely climb as rescue teams reached the more remote areas. The boxing legend had witnessed poverty, had fought his way out of the slums, had seen his share of human suffering, but nothing had prepared him for the profound helplessness he felt watching his countrymen endure this natural catastrophe. Each news update brought fresh waves of anguish as the scope of the disaster became clearer. The province of Cebu, home to approximately 3.4 million residents, was grappling with one of the most significant natural disasters in recent memory. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. had already declared a state of calamity, mobilizing every available resource to aid the affected regions. International aid organizations were coordinating relief efforts, and the global community was beginning to respond with offers of assistance. Yet for Manny, these official responses, while necessary and appreciated, felt insufficient in the face of such overwhelming human tragedy. As dawn broke over the Philippines, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink that seemed almost mockingly beautiful given the circumstances, Manny found himself unable to sleep. He had spent the entire night pacing his home, his mind racing with thoughts of how he could help, how he could use his platform and resources to make a meaningful difference. The weight of his celebrity status had never felt heavier nor more purposeful. The aftershocks continued to rattle the region throughout the early morning hours, each tremor serving as a stark reminder that the earth beneath the Philippines remained restless and unpredictable. The Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology worked around the clock, monitoring seismic activity and providing crucial updates to keep the public informed and safe. But beyond the immediate physical destruction, Manny understood that this earthquake had inflicted wounds that would take much longer to heal. The trauma would linger in the collective memory of the Filipino people. The fear of future disasters would cast shadows over daily life, and the economic impact would ripple through communities for months, perhaps years to come. In the quiet of his home, surrounded by the safety that his success had afforded him, Manny Pacquiao felt the call to action stirring within his soul. In the wake of the devastating 6.9 magnitude earthquake that struck the central Philippines on September 30th, 2025, the nation found itself grappling with immense loss and destruction, The tremor had left at least 69 dead and over 140 injured, with countless families displaced and infrastructure in ruins. Amidst this turmoil, the Filipino people sought solace and leadership from figures they revered. One such figure was Manny Pacquiao, a man whose life story mirrored the resilience and determination now required of the nation. Manny Pacquiao, at 46, had recently returned to the boxing ring after a 4-year hiatus. His comeback fight against Mario Barrios for the WBC welterweight title had ended in a majority draw, yet it had reignited the spirit of a champion within him. This return to boxing came after a series of political endeavors, including a bid for the Philippine Senate earlier in the year, where he placed 18th, falling short of securing a seat. Despite these setbacks, Pacquiao's commitment to his country remained unwavering. As news of the earthquake's devastation spread, Manny felt an immediate and profound sense of duty. The images of collapsed buildings, shattered roads, and grieving families resonated deeply with him. He understood that his influence extended beyond the boxing ring and political arena. He was a symbol of hope and perseverance for millions. In the days following the disaster, Manny mobilized his resources to aid the relief efforts. He coordinated with local and international organizations to provide immediate assistance to the affected areas. His foundation, known for its philanthropic work, dispatched teams to distribute essential supplies such as food, water, and medical aid. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, Manny also pledged a significant personal donation to support rebuilding efforts, aiming to restore homes and infrastructure that had been destroyed. Beyond material assistance, Manny recognized the importance of emotional support. He recorded a heartfelt message to the Filipino people, expressing his condolences to those who had lost loved ones and his solidarity with those affected. In his message, he emphasized the strength and resilience inherent in the Filipino spirit, urging his countrymen to unite and support one another during this challenging time. The response to Manny's actions was profound. His message was broadcast across various media platforms, reaching millions and providing a sense of comfort and hope. Social media was abuzz with expressions of gratitude and admiration for his swift and compassionate response. Hashtags praising his efforts trended nationwide, reflecting the deep connection between Manny and the people of the Philippines. In the midst of coordinating relief efforts, Manny also took the time to visit some of the hardest-hit areas. He met with families who had lost everything, offering words of encouragement and listening to their stories. These visits were not mere formalities. They were genuine expressions of his commitment to his fellow Filipinos. Witnessing the devastation firsthand only strengthened his resolve to do more. Manny's involvement had a ripple effect, inspiring other public figures and private citizens to contribute to the relief efforts. Donations poured in from across the country and the Filipino diaspora, showcasing a collective spirit of bayanihan, a traditional Filipino value of communal unity and cooperation. As the days turned into weeks, the focus shifted from immediate relief to long-term recovery. Manny continued to play a pivotal role, advocating for sustainable rebuilding projects and ensuring that the aid reached those who needed it most. He worked closely with government agencies and non-governmental organizations to develop plans that would not only restore the affected areas, but also make them more resilient to future disasters. Throughout this period, Manny's actions served as a beacon of hope. His unwavering dedication reminded the nation that even in the face of immense tragedy, unity and compassion could pave the way to recovery. As Manny Pacquiao prepared to record his emotional message to the Filipino people, the weight of the moment pressed heavily upon his shoulders. The devastation from the 6.9 magnitude earthquake that had struck Bogo, Cebu, and surrounding areas on September 30th brought back vivid memories of his own childhood struggles. The images of families sleeping in the streets, their homes reduced to rubble, transported him back to the days when he too had known the harsh reality of having nowhere safe to rest his head. Growing up in General Santos City, Manny had experienced firsthand the vulnerability that came with poverty. His family had lived in a small, makeshift dwelling that offered little protection from the elements. He remembered nights when typhoons would rage across Mindanao, and his mother Dionysia would gather him and his siblings close, praying that their fragile shelter would withstand the storm. The fear in her eyes during those moments had never left his memory, and now he saw that same fear reflected in the faces of earthquake survivors across central Philippines. The parallels between his past and the current crisis were undeniable. Just as his family had once struggled to find their next meal, thousands of Filipino families were now facing the same uncertainty. The earthquake had not only destroyed buildings and infrastructure, but had also shattered the delicate economic balance that many families depended upon. Small businesses that had taken generations to build were now buried under concrete and debris. Street vendors who had relied on daily sales to feed their children found their livelihoods completely wiped out. Manny's thoughts drifted to his late father, Rosalio Pacquiao, who had worked tirelessly in construction and farming to provide for the family. Rosalio had taught him that true strength came not from physical power, but from the ability to endure hardship while maintaining hope for a better tomorrow. These lessons resonated deeply as Manny contemplated the resilience required of the earthquake survivors. They would need to rebuild not just their homes, but their entire lives, piece by piece, just as he had done when he first stepped into a boxing gym as a malnourished teenager. The champion reflected on the countless nights he had gone to bed hungry, his stomach cramping from emptiness while he dreamed of a future where his family would never want for anything. Those dreams had sustained him through years of grueling training, devastating losses, and moments when giving up seemed like the only logical choice. Now, as he witnessed his countrymen facing their own seemingly impossible circumstances, he understood that his role extended far beyond that of an entertainer or athlete. The earthquake had claimed at least 69 lives and injured over 140 people, but Manny knew these numbers represented more than statistics. Each casualty was someone's child, parent, sibling, or friend. Each injured person was fighting their own battle for survival, just as he had fought in countless boxing rings around the world. The difference was that these battles were not chosen. They were thrust upon innocent people by forces beyond their control. As he sat in his comfortable home, surrounded by the luxuries that his success had afforded him, Manny felt a profound sense of responsibility. His wife Jinky and their children, Jimuel as Michael, his princess, Queen Elizabeth, and Israel, were safe and secure, but millions of Filipino families could not say the same. The earthquake had served as a stark reminder of how quickly circumstances could change, how fragile the line between security and devastation truly was. The boxing legend understood that his message to the nation needed to carry more than just words of sympathy. It needed to embody the spirit of bayanihan that had always defined the Filipino people during times of crisis. It needed to remind his countrymen that they possessed an inner strength that no natural disaster could destroy, a resilience that had been forged through centuries of overcoming adversity. The morning sun cast long shadows across Manny Pacquiao's study as he sat before his computer, the cursor blinking on a blank document that would soon become one of the most important messages of his life. The earthquake that had devastated central Philippines just days earlier continued to dominate news cycles, with updated casualty reports painting an increasingly grim picture. The death toll had stabilized at 69 confirmed fatalities, but the number of displaced families continued to climb as aftershocks made it unsafe for residents to return to their damaged homes. Manny's phone buzzed constantly with calls from media outlets, government officials, and relief organizations seeking his support and endorsement. His status as a global icon meant that his words carried weight far beyond the borders of the Philippines. International news networks were already reaching out, hoping to secure interviews that would bring global attention to the disaster. Yet despite the pressure and expectations, Manny found himself struggling to find the right words to express the depth of his emotions. The responsibility he felt was overwhelming. Throughout his boxing career, he had grown accustomed to carrying the hopes and dreams of an entire nation on his shoulders every time he stepped into the ring. Filipino families would gather around television sets in remote villages, in crowded urban apartments, and in overseas communities, united in their support for their champion. Their collective energy had fueled him through 8 division world championships and legendary battles against the sport's greatest fighters. But this was different. This was not about entertainment or national pride. This was about survival, about human dignity, about the fundamental right of every Filipino to feel safe in their own homeland. The earthquake had struck the province of Cebu, a region that housed approximately 3.4 million people, many of whom were now facing an uncertain future. The images of collapsed buildings in Bogo and the deep cracks that had torn through the streets of San Remigio served as stark reminders of nature's devastating power. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. had declared a state of calamity and mobilized government resources. But Manny understood that official responses, while crucial, could only address part of the massive challenge ahead. The Filipino people needed something more. They needed hope. They needed to feel that they were not forgotten, and they needed to be reminded of their own incredible capacity for resilience and recovery. As he contemplated his message, Manny thought about the countless times he had witnessed the Filipino spirit triumph over adversity. He remembered visiting remote islands after Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, where entire communities had been wiped off the map, yet survivors had somehow found the strength to smile and rebuild. He recalled meeting overseas Filipino workers who had sacrificed years away from their families to provide better opportunities for their children, embodying a selflessness that defined the national character. The boxing champion also reflected on his own journey from the streets of General Santos City to the pinnacle of athletic achievement. His success had never been just about personal glory. It had always been intertwined with his desire to uplift his countrymen and prove that Filipinos could compete with anyone in the world. Every victory had been dedicated to his people, every championship belt a symbol of what was possible when determination met opportunity. Now, as he prepared to address a nation in mourning, Manny felt the full weight of his platform and influence. His words would be scrutinized, shared, and remembered. They would reach grieving families who had lost everything, rescue workers exhausted from days of searching through rubble, and government officials tasked with coordinating massive relief efforts. Most importantly, they would reach ordinary Filipinos who were looking for reasons to believe that better days lay ahead. The earthquake had tested the Philippines once again, but Manny knew that his people possessed an unbreakable spirit that no natural disaster could destroy. The camera equipment had been set up in Manny Pacquiao's home office, a space that reflected both his athletic achievements and his deep connection to the Philippines. Championship belts lined the walls alongside photographs of him with world leaders, fellow athletes, and ordinary Filipinos whose lives had been touched by his charitable work. The lighting was soft and warm, creating an intimate atmosphere that would help convey the sincerity of his message to the millions who would watch it. Manny had spent hours preparing for this moment, not by writing a script, but by allowing himself to fully absorb the magnitude of the tragedy that had befallen his countrymen. The 6.9 magnitude earthquake that struck Bogo, Cebu on September 30th had left an indelible mark on the nation's consciousness. The official reports continued to paint a sobering picture. 69 confirmed deaths, over 140 injured, and thousands of families displaced from their homes. The aftershocks that continued to rattle the region served as constant reminders that the earth beneath their feet remained unstable and threatening. As he sat before the camera, Manny's mind wandered to the conversations he had held with his family about the disaster. His wife Jinky had been deeply moved by the images of children separated from their parents in the chaos following the earthquake. Their own children, Jimuel, Michael, Princess, Queen Elizabeth, and Israel, had asked difficult questions about why such terrible things happened to innocent people. These conversations had reinforced Manny's understanding that his message needed to speak not just to adults grappling with loss and uncertainty, but also to young Filipinos who were trying to make sense of a world that could change so dramatically in a matter of seconds. The production team worked quietly around him, adjusting cameras and checking audio levels, but Manny barely noticed their presence. His focus was entirely internal, drawing upon decades of experience in high-pressure situations to center himself for what would arguably be one of the most important performances of his life. Unlike his boxing matches, where physical preparation and tactical planning were paramount, this moment required him to access a different kind of strength, the emotional courage to be vulnerable before his entire nation. The earthquake had occurred during a period when the Philippines was already dealing with the aftermath of typhoons Ragasa and Buolai, which had caused significant damage across various regions. This convergence of natural disasters had stretched the country's emergency response capabilities to their limits and highlighted the ongoing vulnerability of Filipino communities to extreme weather events and geological instability. The timing seemed particularly cruel, as many areas were still recovering from the earlier storms when the earthquake struck. Manny thought about the rescue workers who had been laboring tirelessly since the moment the earth stopped shaking. These brave men and women, many of them volunteers from local communities, had risked their own safety to search through collapsed buildings and debris fields. Their dedication exemplified the spirit of bayanihan that had always defined Filipino culture during times of crisis. He knew that his message needed to acknowledge their sacrifices and encourage continued support for their efforts. The technical preparations were nearly complete, and Manny could feel the familiar pre-performance energy building within him. It was similar to the moments before stepping into a boxing ring, but instead of preparing to face an opponent, he was preparing to offer comfort and hope to a grieving nation. His hands, which had delivered countless powerful punches throughout his career, now trembled slightly with the weight of responsibility he felt. The red recording light would soon illuminate, signaling the beginning of a message that would be broadcast across television networks, shared on social media platforms, and transmitted to Filipino communities around the world. In that moment, Manny Pacquiao would transform from a private citizen processing his own emotions about the tragedy into a public figure shouldering the collective grief and hope of an entire nation. The red recording light illuminated, casting a gentle glow across Manny Pacquiao's face as he looked directly into the camera lens. In that moment, the weight of representing an entire nation's grief and hope settled upon his shoulders like a familiar boxing robe. His eyes, which had stared down some of the most fearsome opponents in boxing history, now reflected the profound sorrow and determination of a man speaking not as a champion, but as a fellow Filipino who understood suffering intimately. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of recording equipment capturing what would become one of the most emotionally resonant messages in recent Philippine history. Manny's hands rested calmly on the desk before him, but beneath that composed exterior, his heart raced with the same intensity he had felt before stepping into Madison Square Garden or the MGM Grand. This performance, however, required no physical prowess, only the raw honesty of a man who had risen from poverty to become his nation's most beloved son. As he began to speak, Manny's voice carried the weight of personal experience and genuine empathy. He spoke of the 69 lives lost in the 6.9 magnitude earthquake that had devastated Bogo, Cebu, and surrounding areas on September 30th. Each number represented not just a statistic, but a family forever changed, a community forever scarred. His words acknowledged the over 140 individuals who had been injured, many of whom were still fighting for their lives in hospitals across the region. The earthquake had struck at 9:59 p.m. local time, when families were settling in for the evening, when children were being tucked into bed, when the day's work was done and people felt safest in their homes. The boxing legend's message transcended the immediate tragedy to address the deeper resilience that defined the Filipino character. He spoke of his own childhood in General Santos City, where his family had faced their own struggles with poverty and uncertainty. The parallels between his past and the current crisis were not lost on him. The same determination that had carried him from the streets to world championship glory was now needed by every Filipino affected by the disaster. Manny's voice grew stronger as he addressed the spirit of bayanihan that had already begun to manifest in the earthquake's aftermath. He had witnessed firsthand how communities had come together to search for survivors, share resources, and provide comfort to those who had lost everything. This collective response reminded him of the crowds that had gathered in town squares across the Philippines to watch his fights, united in their support and hope. The same unity that had celebrated his victories was now channeling itself into recovery and rebuilding efforts. The message acknowledged the ongoing challenges facing the affected regions. The deep cracks that had torn through the streets of San Remigio and Cebu served as visible reminders of the Earth's power, but they also represented opportunities for renewal and reconstruction. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. had declared a state of calamity, mobilizing government resources and international aid. But Manny understood that true recovery would require sustained effort from every sector of society. As he continued speaking, Manny's thoughts turned to the children who had been traumatized by the earthquake. He remembered his own children's questions about the disaster and their innocent confusion about why such terrible things happened to good people. His message carried special words of comfort for young Filipinos, reminding them that even in the darkest moments, the Filipino spirit remained unbroken. He spoke of hope as a choice, not just a feeling, a conscious decision to believe in better days ahead despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The recording continued for several more minutes, each word carefully chosen to balance acknowledgement of the tragedy with inspiration for the future. Manny's message would soon reach millions of Filipinos across the archipelago and around the world, carrying with it the authentic voice of a man who had never forgotten his roots. Within hours of Manny Pacquiao's emotional message being released, the digital landscape of the Philippines transformed into a powerful network of shared grief and collective hope. The video, which captured the boxing legend's heartfelt words about the devastating 6.9 magnitude earthquake that had claimed 69 lives and injured over 140 people in central Philippines, began spreading across social media platforms with unprecedented velocity. Filipino communities around the world, from the bustling streets of Manila to the Filipino enclaves in California, New York, and the Middle East, found themselves united in their response to their champion's call for solidarity. The message first appeared on major television networks during primetime broadcasts, interrupting regular programming to deliver Manny's words directly to millions of households. Families gathered around their television sets, many still processing their own trauma from the earthquake's aftershocks that continued to rattle the region. In evacuation centers across Cebu province, where displaced families had sought temporary shelter, portable radios and mobile phones became lifelines connecting survivors to their beloved champion's message of hope and resilience. Social media platforms exploded with activity as the video was shared, commented upon, and translated into multiple languages. The hashtag #Pacquiao for Philippines began trending globally within the first hour, accompanied by thousands of personal stories from Filipinos who had been touched by both the earthquake and Manny's response. Overseas Filipino workers, who had been anxiously following news of the disaster from their workplaces in Dubai, Singapore, and London, found comfort in their champion's familiar voice speaking directly to their fears and hopes. The international media quickly picked up on the story, recognizing the unique power of Manny's platform to bring global attention to the Philippines' ongoing recovery efforts. News outlets from CNN to BBC featured segments about the earthquake, using Manny's message as a focal point for broader discussions about disaster preparedness and the resilience of the Filipino people. His words transcended language barriers, with major networks providing subtitles in Spanish, Arabic, and Mandarin to reach Filipino communities worldwide. In the affected areas of Bogo, Cebu, and San Remigio, where deep cracks still scarred the streets and buildings remained dangerously unstable, rescue workers paused their exhausting efforts to watch the message on their mobile devices. Many of these volunteers had been working around the clock since the earthquake struck at 9:59 p.m. on September 30th, searching through rubble and providing aid to survivors. Manny's acknowledgement of their sacrifices and his call for continued support energized their efforts and reminded them that their work was being witnessed and appreciated by their entire nation. The message also sparked immediate action beyond emotional responses. Donation platforms experienced unprecedented traffic as Filipinos and international supporters rushed to contribute to earthquake relief efforts. Manny's own foundation saw a surge in contributions, while other charitable organizations reported significant increases in both financial donations and volunteer applications. The boxing champion's words had transformed passive sympathy into active participation in the recovery process. Local government officials in the affected provinces reported that the message had provided a crucial morale boost to their communities. The psychological impact of hearing from someone who had overcome tremendous personal adversity resonated deeply with earthquake survivors who were facing their own seemingly insurmountable challenges. Manny's reminder that the Filipino spirit remained unbroken despite the tragedy served as a rallying cry for communities beginning the long process of rebuilding their lives. As night fell across the Philippines, the message continued to circulate, carrying with it the collective strength of a nation united in both grief and determination. 3 weeks had passed since the devastating 6.9 magnitude earthquake struck central Philippines on September 30th, claiming 69 lives and forever altering the landscape of Bogo, Cebu, and surrounding communities. The immediate chaos of collapsed buildings, severed power lines, and desperate rescue operations had gradually given way to the methodical work of reconstruction and healing. Throughout this transformation, Manny Pacquiao's emotional message continued to serve as a beacon of hope, its impact extending far beyond the initial moment of crisis. The boxing champion had not been content to simply offer words of comfort from a distance. In the days following his recorded message, Manny had personally visited the affected areas, walking through the rubble-strewn streets of San Remigio and meeting with families who had lost everything in the disaster. These visits were conducted without fanfare or media attention, reflecting his genuine desire to connect with his countrymen during their darkest hour. Survivors later described how his presence had provided them with strength they didn't know they possessed, reminding them that they were not forgotten by the world beyond their devastated communities. The financial impact of Manny's involvement had been substantial and immediate. His foundation had coordinated the distribution of emergency supplies to over 10,000 families, while his personal donations had funded the construction of temporary housing facilities for those whose homes had been completely destroyed. More importantly, his message had inspired a wave of international support that brought millions of dollars in aid to the Philippines. Filipino communities in countries around the world had organized fundraising events, with many citing Manny's words as the catalyst for their involvement. The psychological healing process had proven to be equally significant. Mental health professionals working in the affected areas reported that Manny's message had provided a crucial framework for survivors to process their trauma. His acknowledgement of their pain, combined with his reminder of Filipino resilience, had helped many individuals find the courage to begin rebuilding their lives. Children who had been too frightened to sleep indoors since the earthquake began returning to their homes after hearing their hero speak about overcoming fear through community support. Educational institutions across the Philippines had incorporated Manny's message into their curricula, using it as a teaching tool to discuss disaster preparedness, community resilience, and the importance of national unity during times of crisis. Students wrote essays about the earthquake's impact and their champion's response, creating a new generation of Filipinos who understood both their vulnerability to natural disasters and their collective strength in overcoming adversity. The long-term reconstruction efforts had taken on new meaning as communities worked to build back better than before. Engineers and architects involved in the rebuilding process spoke of incorporating earthquake-resistant designs that would protect future generations from similar disasters. These improvements were funded in part by the continued donations inspired by Manny's call to action, ensuring that his message would have lasting physical manifestations in the form of safer buildings and infrastructure. As Manny reflected on the weeks that had passed since the earthquake, he understood that his role in the recovery process was far from over. The immediate crisis had passed, but the work of rebuilding lives and communities would continue for years to come. His message had planted seeds of hope that would need constant nurturing through ongoing support and advocacy. The earthquake had tested the Philippines once again, but the response it had generated proved that the Filipino spirit remained unbreakable, strengthened by unity and guided by the enduring hope that tomorrow would always be better than today. Thank you for watching another episode of Champion Stories. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming inspiring tales about Manny Pacquiao. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and many times your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.